Among the most positive developments in the last half of the 20th century has been the remarkable changes in the relationship between the Catholic Church and the Jewish people. While these changes are no secret, they are by no means widely known. To help us understand the significance of these changes, we have invited someone who has been described as a pioneer in Jewish-Catholic relations because of her lifetime of dedication and courage in behalf of improving the relationship between the two communities. We feel honored to call this Judaism Today presentation a conversation with Sister Rose. Our guest is Sister Rose Thiering, Professor Emerita at Seton Hall University. Dr. Thiering, thank you for coming.
Yes.
How did you get into this business, if we can call it that, of Catholic-Jewish relations?
Right. It goes back a long way. In fact, even when I was a child already, studying my catechism, as my mother lined us up to study our catechism, have it ready for the next day, I found such things in my book as the Jews have to wander around the face of the earth without a homeland. It was in my Benzinger history book, catechism book, Bible book. And I said, who are the Jews, Mother? Why can't they have a home? We didn't live in an area near Jews in Wisconsin. I got, the traditional answer from my mother, and I asked at school, because the Jews killed Christ, they have to wander around. Couldn't understand this. And then in another place in my book it said, God is all good. And then I got back, if God's all good, why would he punish Jews like this? It wasn't until I did my master's at the College of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, that some of these things were cleared up by a wonderful professor. And then when I did my doctorate at St. Louis University, Father Maher came to me and he said, Rose, we're in the midst of a self-study here at St. Louis University. We are now examining our most widely used English textbooks, teaching materials, and in history, to see how we teach about other faith groups, other racial groups, and other ethnic groups. And I said, the real problem, Father Maher, is in our religion textbooks. And he said, yes. But I said, that's what we have to study, and do a self-study there. And he knew my background in the area of biblical studies, so he said, Rose, would you like to do that? I said, I surely would, and do it in a formal way. So at St. Louis, for my doctoral dissertation, I examined the most widely used Catholic religion teaching materials to see how we taught about other faith groups, other racial groups, and ethnic groups. But the most visible in our religion textbook would be our relations with other Christian groups, but even more so, our relations with Jews and Judaism. And I must say, when I did the study in 1958, 59, in that area, in the early 60s, I finished in 61, I must tell you that I found very negative areas in our religion teaching materials about Jews and Judaism.
How would you characterize the relationship at that time between the two communities in general? Not just in terms of the textbooks, but also practically.
Well, of course, you see the textbooks, though, the printed material was going to reflect what the teachers were teaching. And naturally, what they were teaching is the way they felt about other faith groups within the Catholic community concerning other Christian groups. the only Christian group that was going to go to heaven were Catholics. And our relations with Jews and with Judaism, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and our ancestors were fine. And I began wondering, even as a child, where were they going to go if they weren't baptized? Were they going to go to heaven? Those things entered my mind as a child. But our relations with Jews after the time of Jesus, really, I would say, was that either Jews should be converted or not around. And this was very, very negative. So that when Pope John the 23rd put on the agenda for Vatican II the topic of Jews and Judaism, and also our relations with other faith groups, this was just very, very revolutionary and was truly what needed to be done. And it was Jules Isaac, a great Jewish historian from France, who really came to the Vatican and talked to Pope John the 23rd and asked him, concerning Jews and Judaism, could we really discuss this? Because Jules Isaac had been in prison in Dachau with a number of Catholic priests, and they talked about our teachings and our really union with Jews and Judaism, that we in the Catholic Church are deeply rooted within Judaism, and therefore, all these positive things should be said and not the negative things. So thank God that it did get into the Vatican Council, and in 15 Latin lines, October 28th, 1965, the document Nostra Aetate contained in it this 15 lines about our relationship to Jews and Judaism. And I would say never again in the Catholic Church can we be teaching negative things about Jews and Judaism.
That must have taken extraordinary courage on the part of several individuals to.
Yes, it did. And I have learned too, and I do know, that a copy of my dissertation was taken to the Vatican at that time. And Cardinal Bea looked at this, and he was just very strong about the fact that we need to change this teaching to a positive teaching about Jews and Judaism, because God called the Jewish people. And they have a covenant with God, and this covenant has never been broken. And we in the Catholic Church are rooted within Judaism. We are grafted onto this tree. It was Jews who brought us to the one true God. From Jews we received, the Ten Commandments. We were just talking about that a little bit earlier, which is important. So that, thank God, books were revised, books were rewritten, and I have followed the editing and the publishing of the new books within the Catholic Church for the teachings from grades, kindergarten through high school. And I've done a number of research studies to see how we are carrying out the statement. Are these statements, that have come from the Vatican, which are very good, the one in 1965 on Nostra Aetate, but then the 1975 document that came out, which helped explain the 65 document in a very wonderful way. And then in 1985, another document came out from Pope John Paul II, stating how we are to teach and preach about Jews and Judaism. So, and another document came out on racism, and pointed out that oftentimes people are very anti-Semitic, but they say, I'm not really anti-Jewish, I'm just anti-Zionist. And the Vatican pointed out that being anti-Zionist was also being anti-Jewish, which was very good.
Well, there was one very important one, I believe he said that anti-Semitism is a sin.
Yes, definitely.
Which is,
in a number, that was in 1975.
Very important.
Anti-Semitism is a sin. And Pope John Paul II has said this on a number of occasions. He was the first pope. Of course, he was from Poland, but also when he went back, one of the first places he visited was Auschwitz, and he knelt down before the stone that represents the Jews, and he prayed, and noted that our Jewish brothers and sisters were slaughtered here at this place, and we must remember. I think one of the greatest things, though, that he did recently that I will ever remember, and this was in 1994, on Yom HaShoah remembrance, and it's coming. We're right in the season of Yom HaShoah, remembering the Holocaust. Pope John Paul II at the Vatican had this special concert on Yom HaShoah, and the music that was played was called Nidre. And this on Yom HaShoah in April. And to me, it said loudly and clearly that the Pope was asking forgiveness of our Jewish sisters and brothers for not caring enough during that time of the Holocaust, because 6 million men, women, and children were lost. 1.5 million children were lost. Please, that we would have had more Schindlers and more Raoul Wallenbergs, more Father Bernard Lichtenbergs, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. There were some that did save Jews, but there were 6 million that died.
When you first started your activity, your studies, how did the Catholic Church community respond to what you were doing, and how did the Jewish community respond to what you were doing?
Well, I must say that in the very beginning, when I was doing my dissertation, we decided that we would have a meeting with all of the monsignors throughout the United States who were superintendents of schools, because if our study was going to be helpful at all, then the superintendent of schools should get textbooks that reflected, positive things about other racial groups and ethnic groups, national groups, and religious groups. So that we had this conference, Education Day, a convocation, and there were 2 other people, researchers, Sister Linus Gleason, who was studying the history books, and Sister Rita Mudd, the history books, and Sister Linus Gleason, the English, and I was doing the religion. And I was on in the afternoon of this day, and I said, Father Maher, you put me on last, and that's going to be the most important subject, and they're not going to like it. And exactly that's what happened. I was all but tarred and feathered that I dared to take religion textbooks and study these, when in each book that was published there was an imprimatur, let it be printed, and a nihil obstat. The materials within this book have been examined. So that over and over, individuals got up and said, one said, for instance, I must warn Sister Rose Thering that even though Pope John the 23rd has been her model in doing this research, that he hasn't changed the gospel, and he never will. And then someone else got up and said, please explain your criteria again. Went on and on like this until Bishop Helmsing from Kansas City, I'll never forget this, got up and said, excuse me, brother priest, I hear a lot of anti-Semitism and prejudice in this room. Research is research, and it must be continued. This we need. But thank God again for the Vatican Council document that came out in 1965. Things were changed, and I know they were changed, because the research that I've done since in 1970, 1975, and 1985-86 indicates that there is progress, that these documents are just not lying on the shelves, but within our Catholic community, institutions of higher learning, seminaries, archdiocesan ecumenical commissions, elementary school teachers and secondary school teachers are using these materials. So thank God.
When did you first come to realize that you were going to succeed?
Well, I really would not have known except when the document came out. As soon as it came out, we could make progress. I can remember Mr. Kaminsky coming to me with his new text. He was so happy. And he said, Rose, you should see this. So I was happy to, because went down the table of contents and a whole chapter devoted to Jews and Judaism in a positive way. So I immediately went to that page. Oh, I said, he said, what's the matter? I said, it says here, the Jews were loved by God. He said, it says that? And that quickly, that old teaching got back into the book. I said, Jews are loved by God. Not past tense, present tense. And he said, that has to go. So that was changed in the manuscript. But I have observed different manuscripts that have come out, and they're very good. And I do teach volunteer to teach religion every Sunday morning. And again, I have an opportunity to follow the texts. For instance, you teach, the scriptures. We call it the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now, scholars are calling it the First Testament and the Second Testament. Of course, I told my little sixth grade this, and I said, why do you suppose we're calling it the First Testament and not the Old Testament? And one said, one of the sixth grade students said, old, when something's old, my mother tosses it out. So if this is old, he said, that wouldn't be good. And we were studying about our ancestors. We were studying how important the Hebrew scriptures are to their little Jewish friends that they'd go to school with. So it's an entirely different attitude that they have.
I have to interrupt.
Yeah.
We will be back in just 1 minute for our enjoyable, really delightful conversation with Sister Rose.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back to our Judaism Today presentation, a conversation with Sister Rose, with our guest, Dr. Rose Thiering.
Thank you very much.
How would you summarize what you've accomplished?
Let me just say this, that once my dissertation was finished, I just couldn't have it sit on the shelf. I had to work in this area of helping Christians come to a better understanding of themselves as Christians, and that includes and must include for all Christians, Catholic and other groups, our rootedness within Judaism. But not only that, we must go further than our rootedness in Judaism, because side by side, each of us pursues our ends. And Christians must constantly remember that Jews are God's covenanted people. So, how to do this? And my best way of doing it is concentrating on seminars or programs for Christians on the study of the history of Judaism, the history of the Holocaust, because again, the whole history of anti-Semitism, the first time that Christians learn this, they want to rebel against that. My church didn't do that. And it's difficult for them to come to this conclusion because, as Father Flannery has said, many times our books do not include the history of our terrible attitude toward Jews during the Crusades, for instance. The pogroms that took place, what happened during the Holocaust. This is not in our books. Also, the positive history about Jews and Judaism is not there, so that we need to include this. Thank God, at Seton Hall University, the Institute of Judeo-Christian Studies, which was founded by Monsignor John M. Osterreicher, may he rest in peace. He founded that in 1953. That institute gave birth, I would say, finally, to the Department of Jewish Christian Studies at Seton Hall. Now, this department is the only department in the nation that offers a master's degree in Jewish Christian Studies for anyone who wishes it, Catholics or other faith groups or Jews. And in this department, students have the opportunity to come to learn in a positive way about Jews and Judaism, the history of anti-Semitism. But my commitment to helping teachers, especially teachers, get this important information is that they can come to Seton Hall and take these courses. But many times teachers just cannot take it because, first of all, teacher salaries really aren't that great, and tuition at Seton Hall is quite high. So they need scholarships to come to take this. So Seton Hall University has founded the Sister Rose Thering Endowment for Jewish Christian Studies, and it makes it possible for teachers to come to take courses on the history of the Holocaust, the history of anti-Semitism. And even more so now, it's so important because, thank God, Governor Christie Whitman has signed into law 2 years ago mandating that all teachers are supposed to be prepared to teach the Holocaust, and that it must also be taught in all our schools, public, parochial, and private. And this is being done. But teachers need this background.
If someone is interested in pursuing that, how can someone get information about that?
They can just call Seton Hall University and ask for the Department of Jewish Christian Studies. And Father Lawrence Frizzell, Dr. Frizzell, is the head of the department now. A couple of years ago, Rabbi Asher Finkel, an Orthodox rabbi, was head of the department. Or they can call Father David Bossman, who is in charge of the Rose Thering Endowment. He's the executive director, which has its own board and so on, at Seton Hall. And these scholarships are available so that if teachers want to come, they just need to call and they can receive a scholarship if they have the qualifications that are needed they must be teaching. They must be teaching in this area.
Hate to be negative, but how would you describe, what would you say was your biggest disappointment? Where things you wanted to do and you just weren't able to accomplish?
Well, there are some very difficult things yet. Let me explain. We just finished Holy Week. And during Holy Week, like on Good Friday, the Gospel of John is read, and our churches are packed. And the Gospel of John, the Passion of John, is very, very difficult. And if the congregants are not exegetes sitting in the pews, and if they have not known about the Vatican document Nostra Aetate, they can just very well, as the gospel is read or dramatized, conclude that Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus. When theologically, Jesus chose to die, and chose to die to win us freedom to heaven. And this has been very difficult for me when I would come to the services and nothing is said before, nothing is said during, and many times my students are there and parents are there, and they're situated in a community where their neighbors may be Jewish, and they're going to school with Jewish boys and girls, friends. And here they hear this, the Jews said, crucify him, crucify him. Now, in our booklet, since the Vatican II, at least this has happened now the last 4 or 5 years, there's a statement that says you cannot blame all Jews for the death of Jesus. And according to the Vatican document, this is what it says. But that's in fine print. Nobody has ever read it. But I must say, this year, after the service, I went to the pastor and I said, this was the best homily I heard given on Good Friday. In the homily, after the reading of the gospel, he said, Jews have had years and years of persecution because we have been blaming Jews for the death of Jesus. And he went on to explain why Jesus died. And it was just a sermon that needs to be given in every single parish at that time that is read. Because the people in the pews are not necessarily exegetes, and they do not know how some of this got into the writings of the gospel. That the apostles were Jews. Just like this last Sunday, we had a reading, and the reading in the gospel said the apostles hid themselves for fear of the Jews. Now the translation in other Bibles say the apostles hid themselves for fear of the authorities. Much different. And it was basically that reason, because the authorities were the Romans, and they were deathly afraid of the Romans.
We have just a minute left.
I'm just so sorry that we don't have enough time to discuss this.
But I would like to get in, what would briefly you feel is your most gratifying accomplishment?
I would say that again, schools throughout the nation and the churches throughout, both, I would say, within the other Christian faiths besides Catholics, are coming to the recognition that indeed we owe Jews a great debt of gratitude. From Jews we have come to the one true God. We have been grafted on. And I would hope that, and I know, that Christians become better Christians once they have this total recognition and understanding and closeness to God's people.
What do you look to as the future relationship between the Catholic and Jewish communities, in just a very brief few minutes?
Well, I would hope that, again, that soon Pope John Paul II would issue this document for Catholics concerning the Holocaust. And if he doesn't, I'm sure that many of us would like to help him issue this document. And I would say that the very fact that you're doing what you're doing right here in this special program indicates again, what we have done within the last 30 years. We really made some progress. When you compare it to the 2,000 years of anti-Semitism, that's not much, but please God, it will be more.
I thank you so much for coming. It's been a delight having you, and I thank you for being you.
Thank you so much.
Because you're one of these special people. Thank you.